Hello, my loves. I'm Ellie Frost, and I help people rapidly and radically heal and transform during and after narcissistic abuse. And I want to talk today about when you are surrounded by toxic people, right? Because this is often what happens after we are either with narcissists or leave narcissists. We may find ourselves surrounded by more narcissists or certainly a lot of toxic people in our lives. So I'm going to talk through some of the reasons why this happens and what to know about it. Let's talk about me for a minute, right? Because this is my story. I was surrounded by toxic people for most of my life. And guess what that did to me? It destroyed me. It crushed my soul. I always want to believe the best in people, and I'm going to get into that. But it is so destroying. Right? When you realize the people around you are so unhealthy that you can't have genuine connections, that there's all this icky, gunky, toxic, nasty, mean, shitty stuff that you don't agree with going on in your relationships, right? And that it doesn't seem that you have that many wholehearted ones, right? So why does this happen? Well, let's look. I mean, one of the things that makes you attracted to narcissists and toxic people is your empathy, right? And that's because we show a lack of sort of judgment on people, right? When people are highly empathetic, don't judge people that hard. But what we don't often have is very strong boundaries at the same time, or language. I think a lot of things, I've had to go back in my life and think about what I wish I'd said at the time, so that I know that next time I'd have the words. And that was actually that's been quite a helpful exercise when I go back on my memories of times when I was really surrounded by toxic people and, really thought through, well, what would I say now? What would I wish I could have said then? Because I didn't have the words, right? So a lot of it is when we feel overwhelmed like that or ambushed by someone, because toxic people make a play for you, especially if they can sense you're empathetic and they can manipulate you and you're a people pleaser and, they know. So they often will make a beeline for you, right? Because you become someone that they can easily use. So I often didn't have the words to say to toxic people, to put boundaries in, or when they were doing disgusting things or saying disgusting things about me, I didn't really know how to approach it, right? So I kind of just backed away and put up with it. But having a lot of empathy, not having strong boundaries, and not having communication tools, right? To know how to express ourselves. Now, again, with toxic people, the challenge is when you express your emotions, they dismiss them, they devalue them, they invalidate you, they gaslight you. So again, it can feel very pointless, right? So you can feel very beaten down. Another reason we end up surrounded by them is because abuse has become normal to us. I thought I was just a very understanding person for a lot of my life, but what I was sort of acknowledging was because I'd grown up with narcissistic parents, right? My tolerance for shitty behavior was extremely high. Absolutely extremely high. I would let people treat me very badly, really, looking at it. And I suppose because I hadn't realised the level of abuse I'd gone through, this was quite normal to me, to be talked over, to be shut down, to be bullied. It was kind of normal. I also had other insecurities, because I had quite a big lie a lot of the time, and that would sometimes make people very jealous and they would go for me, right? And I thought, I don't want to be this light if people are going to, I don't want to ignite nasty feelings. What I was not acknowledging was that light also made a lot of people love me if I would let those people in. And I'm going to get onto that because, that light was a benefit, but I saw it as a negative in the end and shut it all down because I thought it just meant I would get attacked, right? By the wrong people I would. And of course, without the right tools to know how to deal with those people, I was ill-equipped. But the other thing was, and an interesting question is, are you attracting the negative people, or are you attracted to them? You see, the thing is, there were healthy people trying to come into my life at various times that I actually was pushing away without realizing it. Why? It wasn't familiar to me. I was used to, abusive people, and my nervous system, because we get what's familiar, the brain says is safe. So my nervous system would feel drawn to them. I would give them more of my time and energy. And in fact, I'd feel a little bit awkward around healthy people, right? Isn't that interesting? Now that's what happens to victims of trauma and childhood abuse and any abuse, right? So I would feel these people were exciting. They weren't exciting. They were chaotic, destructive, really not very nice people, right? But in my mind, because I'd been conditioned, that was exciting to me in some way, right? As crazy as it seems. So I can see, like, you know, how I talked myself out subconsciously of healthy relationships. Well, they seem boring, right? These toxic people seem exciting. Not that I was particularly drama filled, but like they were always drama filled, but my body was used to that chaos. My nervous system kind of relaxed in it. That seemed safe and stable when it was the most unsafe and unstable thing. Plus I'd feel this pull towards them. Like they were somehow exciting to me. Right? Whereas the safe, normal, steady people weren't. And actually my nervous system would feel a bit confused around them because it was used to being in chaos. So there's loads of things. One other thing let's talk about me still, because I'm a professional. I was, not anymore. I was a professional at being around, you know, having lots of toxic people in my life and then getting really worried that was all there was in the world, which I know it isn't. I have this rose-tinted glasses syndrome, right? And again, this is kind of conditioned into us, always see the best in people, all this kind of stuff. But, you know, I was a little bit delusional in that. And I think part of that was a coping mechanism because my childhood was so difficult. Like I had to have that magical thinking. I had to imagine and fantasize that I had a good family that loved me, even though that was the opposite of what was going on, because my body couldn't cope. I couldn't cope with the overwhelm of what the reality was. So there is this magical thinking that comes in sometimes, right? And I guess I used that in my adult life where even when I was being very poorly treated, I would put the magical thinking on it. Like they don't mean it. I'd make excuses for them. We learn how to do this with narcissists. We have so many excuses for the narcissist because we desperately want to cling on to the illusion. So I had this magical thinking about all these toxic people in my life. Yeah, because they would do some nice things. Abuse is never usually just abuse. If it was, we would just walk away. It's always the highs and the lows. That's how they trauma bond you. So the magical thinking, the rose-colored glasses, the, you know, wanting the fairy tale part of me, that can be positive, but I have to also give myself a reality check, right? And I wasn't good at doing that. And that is a survival, it was a trauma response in me. So it's familiar. There's some kind of excitement from these people because they were like, I don't know, like what that was about. But like, I think it was just the draw to them, you know, that I was conditioned to have. And these were dangerous in lots of ways, like definitely emotionally dangerous people. So look, the problem with this is we can go through cycles of abuse and then like do not think for a minute that you can go through narcissistic abuse and not be affected. I'm not saying that to be the bearer of bad news, right? I've worked with hundreds of people and I've worked with myself, and like that's the hardest client I've ever had is me, right? So like you cannot come off unscathed. You learn survival strategies and things, right, that then make you attracted to and more attractive to toxic people. And then your whole world could get blown up by them, right? They're not the only people in the world, but they take up, the other thing with toxic people is they take up so much energy and space because they're full of drama, because they're full of intensity, right? I think that was a bit of the thing I craved, the intensity, and I was getting it from these toxic people. But like, you know, because they take up all your energy, right, you don't have a lot of room for other friends. And you might, especially if you've been abused like I was as a child, but also through adulthood, right, you might not have the confidence to think you fit in with healthy people subconsciously. You're not used to normality, you see, right? So it can feel uncomfortable, right? The brain says safe to what's familiar, not what is safe, right? There's a function in our brain, so we gravitate towards what we know because there's a feeling of safety in our nervous system around what we know, even though these people dysregulate your nervous system massively, right? So unfortunately, our subconscious often takes over more than our conscious brain, right? So we're drawn to people for the wrong reasons. And these connections can feel really strong at first, right? But sometimes for the wrong reasons, right? So the world isn't full of toxic people, when we meet healthy people, if we're used to toxic people, we can feel out of place, right? We're not used to healthy relationships if we've been through a lot of abusive ones, right? Now, I've had some healthy relationships, so it's not all being toxic, it's not all being abused, but I definitely notice in times of pressure, or I mean just who I've gravitated towards in social settings, or how much attention I've given certain people, the toxic ones, but they are the attention grabbing ones, they've definitely pulled my energy, right? And I've let that happen more than people who I could have had a much more stable, safe relationship with, right? Just because of all these dynamics. So if you've been in toxicity, you've got used to toxicity, you're more vulnerable to more toxicity because you might not have healed some of the patterns in yourself that make you more susceptible to these people, and you're not good at setting boundaries, right? You're likely, and these people put a lot of demands on you, which toxic people do, like you're likely to encounter more until you break all the patterns. So this is about self-healing, right? This is about coming into self. This is about boundaries. This is about understanding what is safe and what isn't. It's also about understanding that sometimes things and people that feel uncomfortable are only feeling uncomfortable because you're breaking a pattern, right? And sometimes the things that feel compelling and exciting are feeling that way for the wrong reasons. Yeah? Which is quite hard for the brain. Because, you know, what's coming from intuition and what's coming from our patterning, there's two different things. And often, even with the toxic people, I knew, my intuition knew this person was off, but there was so much pull towards them, which you'll find in narcissistic abuse as well, right? So your intuition is separate to your programming, but we've got to be present in our nervous systems enough to hear it, right? So, unfortunately, being through narcissistic abuse and other types of abuse gives us often a very high pain threshold, and we tend to have we've had to develop certain survival mechanisms that make us prone to being around toxicity until we fully change those patterns and see them for what they are. Yeah, and that is things like living by our values, living in integrity, being authentic, learning what our needs, wants and desires are, learning to speak up. I was terrible at that. I was the easygoing one, right? I don't need or want anything, I'm fine. But that's not okay, right? Because that's just not me not being in touch with my inner child, right? So understanding what healthy patterns should look like and feel like and working towards that, right? Then you won't tolerate toxic people in the same way. You won't put up with them. You won't make excuses for them. And you'll know that and you won't be so flattered again, because when you repair your self-esteem, another thing with toxic people is it flatters your self-esteem, right? They're making a beeline for you, right? You think they must really like you. In fact, they know that you're someone that they can easily manipulate, right? But like, it feels flattering. It feels flattering. So you have to repair your self-esteem and sometimes be prepared to walk alone for a while. Yeah. Until you can find people who are healthier for you in safer environments and regulate your nervous system properly. So yeah, if you're finding yourself surrounded by toxic people, this may be some of the reasons why. Lots of love.